The woman sitting at Alden Thorne's right hand was not his wife. His wife had been placed at the far end of the table, beside an aunt who no longer quite remembered her name, and no one at the Thorne estate that evening had offered Sylvia Ashworth a reason. That was the first cruelty. The second was that it was their 10th anniversary. The dining room overlooked the inlet, and on clear November evenings the lights of the North Shore pressed against the water like something borrowed from a better version of a life. Sylvia had loved that view when Alden first brought her to this house. She had stood at those windows before they were married and thought, I could build something real here. Not just in the house, in the life itself. In the years ahead of them. 12 guests had gathered for what Alden had described as an intimate celebration. Rowena Thorne sat at the head of the table, as she always did when the family gathered under her roof. She had not remarried after Alden's father died, and she ran both the Thorne household and the family's investment trust with the kind of quiet authority that does not require announcement. Alden's sister, Patricia, was there with her husband, 2 business partners, Crawford the family solicitor, who had known the Thornes for 31 years and had drawn up more of their agreements than anyone cared to count, and Viviana Cortes, introduced to the room as a valued colleague from the Toronto office, seated beside Alden at his right hand, as though the placement had always been the natural arrangement. It had not been. Sylvia had seen the place cards before the guests were called to table. She had slipped into the dining room while the others gathered in the sitting room over drinks, looking for a moment alone, and she had found it. Her own name written in handwriting she did not recognize on a small ivory card positioned at the table's far end. She had stood there with one hand resting against the back of an empty chair, reading her own name in a stranger's script. And she had understood in a way that left no room for charitable interpretation, exactly what had been arranged. She walked to her seat without comment. She sat down. She placed her napkin across her lap and looked down the length of the table toward Alden, who had his head turned toward Viviana Cortes, and was laughing at something she had said before the first course arrived. That was what 10 years with Alden Thorne had taught her to do, absorb an insult so completely that the people around her might mistake the absorption for grace. Rowena Thorne had been watching from the head of the table. Her eyes moved from Sylvia's face to Viviana Cortes at Alden's side, and then back to Sylvia, and the expression on her face settled into something that was yet action, but was preparing itself to become one. The trouble had been arriving for 4 months, the way certain kinds of weather arrive. Not suddenly, but in a progressive lowering of the sky that changes everything by degrees while you stand inside it. Sylvia had noticed the silences first. Alden had always been a man who filled the house with the noise of his own thinking. Ideas half-formed at the kitchen counter, frustrations aired without ceremony. The small daily monologue of a person who lived with someone they trusted to listen. That quality had diminished in July and disappeared almost entirely by September. He came home with nothing to say about his day, and when she asked, the answers were smooth and short and felt like doors being gently but definitively closed. Then came the evenings. He stopped coming home to dinner. Not every night, that would have been too legible, but often enough that the rhythm of their household broke and was not repaired. He was busy. The Toronto expansion was complicated. A particular investor required constant management. She had heard each explanation offered with the unhurried confidence of a man who had practiced them somewhere. And she had accepted them because the alternative, naming what she suspected before she was certain, felt like choosing a door that could not be reopened. She had been an architect when they married. She had run a small firm on Granville Island with 2 partners, and the work had been genuinely good. The slow, careful kind of good that earns a reputation over years rather than announcements. When Alden's career expanded and the Thorne family obligations multiplied, she had stepped back from the practice. Just temporarily, she had told herself and them. Just while things were adjusting. 3 years passed and the adjusting became permanent. Her name left the firm's letterhead. Her clients were passed to her former partners. She became, without quite choosing it as a destination, the woman positioned beside Alden Thorne at every occasion requiring one. Some mornings she managed not to grieve it. Other mornings were harder. She had been looking for a consulting contract she had recently signed. The first professional work she had taken on in 3 years, and she had not yet told Alden about it, when she found the receipt. It was inside a leather travel folder he used for international trips, slipped beneath a stack of airline itineraries, a jewelry receipt, a gold bracelet custom-made from a studio on Queen Street West in Toronto. The piece had been commissioned in October. The receipt was dated a week before Alden returned from a trip he had told her was about difficult negotiations with a development partner, during which he had called her each evening from a quiet room, and said he wished he could be home sooner. The bracelet was not for her. Her birthday was in June. Their anniversary was in May. There was no occasion in October that called for a gift to his wife, and the amount on the receipt was not the amount spent on something given without intention. Sylvia had read the receipt twice. She had folded it along its original crease. She had replaced it exactly where she had found it. Then she had signed her consulting contract at the kitchen table and made herself a cup of tea she barely touched. When Alden came home that evening, he had kissed her forehead with the practiced ease of a husband who had long since stopped thinking about the gesture, and he had mentioned the anniversary dinner, a small gathering, he said, just family, and a few close colleagues at his house. He had said it should be a good evening. She had agreed that it should be. She had not mentioned the receipt. She had decided instead to wait, not because she was uncertain of what it meant, but because she had not yet decided what she intended to do with what she knew. Certainty and readiness were not the same thing. She was certain. She was preparing. Now she sat at the far end of her anniversary table while Viviana Cortes wore the bracelet at the near end. And the preparation resolved itself into something still and final. She had seen it when Viviana extended her hand in greeting at the beginning of the evening. A gold bracelet with a delicate hammered detail along one side, the kind of piece made by craftspeople who do not repeat themselves. Distinctive enough that a person who had read its description on a receipt 6 weeks earlier would recognize it across a room without question. Sylvia had recognized it. She had said nothing. She had gone to her seat at the wrong end of the table, and she had waited to understand how the evening intended to reveal itself. It revealed itself through Rowena Thorne. The first course had been cleared. The room had settled into the particular texture of a family dinner, where everyone is managing something. Conversation distributed carefully, glasses attended to, attention directed away from the one arrangement at the table that nobody had agreed to name out loud. Rowena set down her fork. "Viviana," she said. Her voice did not require volume. It was the voice of a woman who had spoken across boardrooms and across gravesides and across every variety of difficult room, and it carried. Viviana looked up from her conversation with Alden. "Yes, Mrs. Thorne? That bracelet you're wearing." Rowena's attention was steady and direct in the way of someone who already knows the answer and is asking for the benefit of the room. "It's a custom piece." Viviana's hand moved slightly toward her wrist, then stilled. "Yes." "Where did it come from?" A pause of perhaps 2 seconds, long enough for the table to notice. "It was a gift," Viviana said. "From whom?" Rowena asked. Alden's chair shifted. "Mum." "I'm speaking to Viviana." Rowena did not look away from her. Viviana looked at Alden. The look was unmistakable, waiting to be managed, waiting to be provided with an exit. Alden said nothing. The silence lasted long enough to be its own kind of confession. "From a friend," Viviana said finally. Rowena turned toward her son. Her expression did not harden. It did not need to. It was already set. "You placed your wife at the far end of this table on her own anniversary. A woman you introduced as a colleague is sitting where Sylvia has sat at every family dinner for the past 10 years. And that same woman is wearing a piece of jewelry that was not commissioned for your wife." She paused. "I would like you to explain this to me, Alden. Or to the room, choose whichever you prefer." The solicitor, Crawford, had stopped pretending to read the label on the wine bottle. Alden's sister Patricia looked up from her plate and then, slowly, did not look back down. Both business partners became very interested in something beyond the windows. Alden's voice came out lower than usual. "You're embarrassing everyone at this table." "No," Rowena said, "you did that before we sat down." The words moved through the room like cold air through an open door. Patricia made a small sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement, and was in its ambiguity its own form of acknowledgement. Sylvia had not moved. She sat at the end of the table with her hands folded in her lap, her posture exactly as it had been since she took her seat, composed, uninflected, giving nothing to the room that it could use against her. She had developed that quality over years of standing in difficult rooms beside Alden. She had not known until this moment how much she would need it for a room like this one. But she was not hiding. She was watching, and she had heard every word, and she had decided something. Alden turned to her. His voice had changed. The confidence had gone out of it and something rawer had taken its place. "Sylvia, let me explain." "You don't need to," she said. "I found the receipt in October. I have known for 6 weeks what that bracelet is and who purchased it. I needed tonight to understand who received it." The table absorbed this without sound. Alden's expression changed in a way she had not seen before, the particular change of a man who has organized a great deal of careful deception and is watching it cease to function. "Sylvia, I never meant to be caught," she said quietly. "I know, that's the part that hurt most." She looked at him with the full attention she had always given him, none of it softened now by courtesy. "I gave up the practice for you. I told myself it was a season and it became 3 years. I have managed your family's calendar and your professional correspondence, and every social obligation that your name required. Because you asked me to, and because I believed the life we were building together was worth that cost." She paused, not for effect, because the next part required her to be careful with her own voice. Tonight you seated me at the end of a table in your mother's house at our anniversary dinner and gave my place to another woman. In front of your family, in front of Crawford, who drew up our marriage agreement, in front of your sister. She looked once around the room, not accusingly, simply clearly. You believed that I would accept it because I have accepted smaller versions of this for months. You believed my silence was permission. She looked at Viviana Cortes, not with anger, with the particular sadness of a woman who understands that her fury, if she displayed it, would be the thing the room remembered instead of the truth. I don't hold you responsible for choices he made, she said. But you knew whose seat that was. Viviana looked at the table. Her fingers had moved away from the bracelet. Rowena spoke, Sylvia. Her voice had shifted, still certain but without the edge of command. Something warmer underneath it and more careful. Come and sit here. She indicated the chair at her right hand. The chair of honor in the Thorne family. The place reserved, by decades of unwritten convention, for the person most deserving of respect in any given gathering. Sylvia looked at her mother-in-law for a long moment. Thank you, she said. I want you to know I mean that. She rose from her seat. She straightened to her full height. She did not look at the bracelet again. I'm not going to sit beside him, she said. Not this evening, not after this. Then sit beside me, Rowena said. Not as his wife, as yourself. Patricia made the same small sound as before, but this time it was clearly agreement. She pressed her hand briefly flat against the table, a gesture so small it would have been invisible to anyone not watching for it. Sylvia saw it. She stood for a moment at the end of the table, and she looked at the room. The people who had jet seating arrangement and lowered their eyes. The people who had accepted what Alden had arranged, because declining to notice is easier than refusing to participate, and all of them now looking at her with the uncomfortable attention of people who understood they had chosen wrong. I built a life around this table, she said. I don't regret the years I gave to it. I gave them willingly, with the full belief that the marriage they supported was real. She looked at Alden one final time. I am not leaving because I am defeated. I'm leaving because I finally understand the difference between being tolerated and being valued. And that is a distinction, she said, that I should have insisted on much sooner. She set her napkin beside her plate. She walked to the door. No one stopped her. Rowena watched her go with the expression of a woman who had hoped she was wrong about how the evening would end, and had prepared herself anyway, which is its own form of love. The door of the Thorne estate closed behind her. The November air came off the inlet cold and factual, the way West Vancouver nights arrive in autumn, without apology, clearing everything down to its essentials. She sat in her car without starting it. There was no performance left to maintain, and so she did not maintain one. She cried in the way that honest grief arrives when the effort of managing it is finally finished. Steadily, without drama, for as long as it needed. 10 years. The practice she had closed. The table she had been moved away from. The bracelet that had been commissioned in October from a studio she had once admired. Given to a woman whose name she now knew. Worn to a dinner that had been arranged in her own honor. When it was finished, she started the engine. She drove home. She slept, eventually, in the room with the east-facing window she had always preferred over Alden's choice of the west. In the morning she called her former business partner, whose number she still knew without looking it up. She did not call Alden first. He came to the house on the 4th day, carrying the particular expression of a man who has run through the stages of self-justification and arrived, finally and too slowly, at something closer to understanding. She let him say what he had come to say. She listened without interruption, because she had always been a better listener than he deserved. And because she wanted to be certain, she did not carry the weight of his unheard words into the next stage of her life. When he finished, she told him she had already consulted a solicitor. She told him what she needed from the process, and she told him the terms she considered fair. She told him she hoped he would be honest throughout it, because she had earned that much from him at minimum. He asked if there was any remaining possibility. She looked at him steadily. I loved you without reservation, she said. That was never the part that failed. What failed was your willingness to treat my presence in your life as something you could arrange around your own convenience. I won't recover from that inside this marriage. I don't believe you would either, if you were honest. He did not argue. He nodded once, which was the most honest thing she had seen him do in months. Rowena called 9 days later. She did not mention Alden by name. She asked about the consulting arrangement Sylvia had mentioned in passing during their last real conversation, months before the dinner. She asked whether Sylvia had considered reopening the firm. Then she said, in the particular register of a woman who has been paying attention while everyone else looked elsewhere. I always thought you were more than what you were asked to be here. I should have said it sooner. Sylvia told her it helped to hear it now. She meant that too. 8 months after the anniversary dinner, she signed a lease on a studio space in Gastown, 3 floors up in a building with good bones and east-facing windows that caught the morning light the way she had hoped they would when she first walked the space on a Tuesday in June. Her name was on the letterhead again, only her name this time, the way she had privately always wanted it. She had 3 commissions confirmed before the ink was dry on the lease. Her former clients had remembered her. Word had moved through the right circles with the quiet efficiency that a good reputation earns when the work was genuinely worth remembering. The drafting table came out of storage. She set it up beneath the east window. She made coffee in the early mornings before the rest of the building woke, and she worked in the quiet that was not lonely because it was chosen, which made all the difference. She thought sometimes about the anniversary dinner. About the place card in handwriting that was not Alden's. About the bracelet catching the candlelight. About the chair at the wrong end of the table and the chair at Rowena's right hand. That she had declined because accepting it would have meant something other than what she needed to mean. She had not fought for the seat. She had made the room understand why she should never have been asked to. Rowena sent a card at Christmas routed through her solicitor to Sylvia's studio. Inside it said only, "Wishing you exactly what you've built for yourself." The card arrived on a Wednesday morning, and Sylvia placed it against the east window where the light touched it in the afternoon. That was sufficient. She was learning, slowly and without surprise, that sufficient and enough were not the compromises she had once believed them to be. They were, when they came honestly, the most solid ground available. She was standing on it. She intended to stay.